Us for our 2021 SFSP program training. We're happy that you're here with us. We have Alina Carlin and Carol Nutsetzer here with us today to talk about permitting and health inspections and that sort of thing. So we'll turn it over to her and hope that you enjoy this presentation. Thank you.
Hi, this is Alina Carlin. I'm with the Retail Food Program for Louisiana Department of Health, and I'll be talking about the summer feeding program for 2021. We're going to focus on existing SFAs, our school food authorities. And if I say summer feeding authorities, forgive me. I always want to say summer feeding instead of school food authority. And so I'm just going to move on and keep going. If I time out, please let me know. It is a long presentation. I'm going to do my best to get through all of it. However, we will have it available to LDOE to share as well. And I'll just go ahead and move on. Oops. Okay, so sponsors must apply for permits for each feeding and or cooking site through the local LDH office. Existing SFAs must inform the parish sanitarian's office of the SFA status on whether summer feeding will be provided, inform the parish of the operations that will take place. You're going to want to include locations and delivery routes, whether you're providing congregate or non-congregate sites or both. And if you do non-congregate, please let us know if you're doing single day meals or multiple days of meals or both, who's providing the meals, and also provide a plan for how food will be delivered safely. Only schools that are part of the USDA National School Breakfast and School Lunch Program don't require an additional LDH permit to operate. Congregate summer feeding sites and or cooking sites, however, must have an LDH permit to operate. If a school serves food at a different location besides grab and go, where no food holding overnight or no food preparation takes place, then they need a permit other than that at the other feeding site location. Also, sites must have an LDOE approved sponsor, and the temporary permit will expire. Title 51, Part 23 for retail food establishments requires that anyone who sells or distributes food have LDH permit to operate. Therefore, the sponsor and site needs LDH permit to distribute food. Again, however, non-congregate grab and go sites with no food holding overnight and no food preparation will not require a permit. For the summer feeding sponsor kitchen and site, they must meet the sanitary code requirements. That's the LAC Title 51 Part 23 retail food establishments. It can be found at our website, eatsafe.la.gov. So there are many different types of sites, congregate and non-congregate sites. The congregate sites typically are the full service kitchens, satellite kitchens, outdoor sites, mobile units, and the non-congregate sites are the grab and go sites and delivery to homes. The USDA has a waiver for non-congregate pickup for food through June 30th, 2021, and delivery to homes for until 6/30/2021 as well. And we are expecting further extensions. We'll be waiting for LDOE to inform us of that. So for a full service kitchen, if that's any kitchen that prepares, cooks, and heats or heats food to serve, these sites will be required to have all the necessary requirements that a regular restaurant would have. A hand sink with separate paper towels in all food prep and dishwashing areas, 3-compartment sink, grease trap, cold holding equipment, possibly hot holding equipment, depending on your menu, sanitizer test strips for washing, rinsing, sanitizing, mop sink, a dumpster pad, restrooms for staff and children who are dining at the site, and also a hand sink for children dining at the site. The hand sink for children must be away from all food prep areas. For satellite kitchens, these are kitchens where no food preparation or cooking takes place. Food's provided by the sponsor-run kitchen, sponsor-run full-service summer feeding site, or from a commercial kitchen with the LDH food and drug permit to operate. Utensils must be must be returned to the prep site for proper dishwashing and sanitizing. And all food must arrive on temperature, and a log must be used to record dates, times, and temperatures of the food. Those logs must be retained for 3 years plus the current year, as required by USDA and LDOE. Here, there will be minimal food assembly, and in the case of congregate dining, if it's allowed, then a hand sink must be provided with soap and paper towels, hot water for the children and servers to wash their hands, as restrooms as well for children and servers. For congregate feeding sites only, these require only minimal plumbing requirements, hand sinks, restrooms, soap and paper towels for children to wash hands, and also the temporary permit will be issued for dates provided by the sponsor. The permit must be posted at the feeding site for all service days. Also, the feeding site must have access to the equipment and plumbing as noted. In regards to congregate dining outdoor sites, all food must arrive as a packaged unit. No food assembly is allowed here. Utensils must be returned to the prep site for proper dishwashing and sanitizing. If you have containers such as ice chest campers, etc., these must be maintained clean. Hand sink, again, with soap and paper towels must be available for children servers, as well as restrooms. So this is a little different for mobile food establishments and for congregate sites. These are basically traveling food establishments. It may not be practical with COVID-19 limitations for the congregate site. All food must arrive as a packaged unit. No food assembly is allowed on the mobile unit. Basically, that has to be prepared at the commissary. The safest meals here are shelf-stable meals. However, if potentially hazardous food is allowed or is served, then the mobile unit has to use time as public health control. Basically, what that means is there's a 4-hour rule, basically, that food has to be distributed and used or discarded. They have to have the food marked with a discard time. Also, you have to have a written plan. You have to keep logs and discard food after 4 hours. Basically, you have to also keep the logs for 3 years plus the current year. And also in regards to mobile food establishments for summer feeding, you have to only use single service plates and utensils only. So what's a commissary? A commissary is a permitted base of operations. They must report to the commissary daily for supplies and cleaning services. And it's provided for dumping and flushing of liquid waste from the wastewater tank. It should be discharged to a permitted sanitary sewage system. The servicing area must be kept clean and in good repair. Potable water serving equipment must be installed to prevent cross-contamination, and also potable water must be obtained from the commissary for hand sinks if applicable. Again, these mobile food units for congregate feeding may not be practical during COVID-19. However, if they are allowed to be used, restrooms must be provided by the stop site. A hand sink with soap and paper towels must be available for children and servers dining at the site. The site may add additional hand sinks with portable sinks for use by the diners of the congregate mobile unit. If the portable hand sinks are used, they must be filled with potable water, and wastewater must be discarded. The operator must include a schedule of the proposed times and address of stops on the route as well. So I wanted to show a slide of the differences between congregate mobile food establishments versus non-congregate delivery vehicles. So I just went over all the basics for the mobile food establishments. Basically, those have to be permitted by LDH. It requires that food is packaged at the commissary. Typically, single meals are served, which requires time with public health control only. Children eat at the site, again, may not be feasible during COVID-19. Also must wash their hands prior to eating meals at the site. and restrooms are required at the congregate site. Whereas if you have a grab and go site or a meal delivery to home, grab and go specifically, no food holding overnight, no food prep. In these cases, for non-congregate delivery vehicles, typically you'll see, as pictured below, refrigerated trucks. However, we do allow for approved delivery vehicles depending on the sponsor's plan of packaging and meals served. The delivery vehicle doesn't require an LDH permit, and it does allow for the delivery of one meal per recipient. In this case, you have to keep the temperature, the food on temperature, or you can use time as public health control for the single delivery of meals. If you have multiple days of meals, however, you have to keep the food on temperature. That means 41 or below or 135 and above. Also, the meals have to be specifically labeled on the packaged food for single and multiple meals. We'll go over that in the food safety portion. And a hand sink is not required at the site for children to wash hands. Also, restrooms are not required for children at the grab and go sites or the meal delivery to home. So as far as the application for a permit, any site that does not have a current annual LDH permit to operate must also submit a retail food plans review packet questionnaire. Please include a floor plan and menu in addition to the summer feeding questionnaire. Any first-time use site that has never been used as a summer feeding site must submit a retail food plans review packet questionnaire and the summer feeding application. For previous FSA sponsors, however, with no change in operation from the previous year's submission, only the summer feeding application is required. Also, for the congregate mobile food units, the mobile food establishment plans review questionnaire needs to be submitted in addition to the summer feeding questionnaire. And those, all of that information can be found at our website, eatsafe.le.gov. The applications, the questionnaires should be filled out at least and submitted to the local LDH office at least 2 weeks before the summer feeding service begins, a minimum of 2 weeks. It may take 2 weeks for the parishes to review plans depending on where and when the application was submitted. Many times the parish has many other plans to review and yours just has to wait in line to be reviewed. So make sure you submit it in at least 2 weeks beforehand. Include a floor plan of the space and sample menu. And the local health department staff may ask for additional information that may prolong the permitting process, so please don't wait. Again, also, May 15th is the deadline to apply with LDOE as a sponsor. If the site manager doesn't own the site location, the sponsor must submit a site agreement made with the owner of the site. Please include information regarding the equipment that the summer feeding site will have access to in the facility, and also tell the times that the summer feeding meals will be served. In regards to transportation of food, sponsors who plan to deliver or have delivered prepared food to multiple feeding sites, grab and go sites, and meal delivery routes, please submit locations and routes of all feeding sites, including non-congregate grab and go meal delivery routes. Also, specifically for meal delivery to homes, LDH doesn't need to know or want to know the individual's recipient's home locations, name, or contact information. We just need to see the route that you take and the proposed delivery times. Also, submit a written plan explaining the delivery plan for holding food safe at safe temperatures. Train staff on how to monitor and record temperatures. In regards to mobile units, not including non-congregate delivery of meals, each unit must submit an application packet. The operator must include a schedule of the proposed feeding times and address of the stops on the route. Also, if potentially hazardous food is served, then a written plan for using time as public health control must also be submitted. Logs must be maintained, and it's the responsibility of the cooking site to mark when food was taken out of temperature control, and it's also responsibility of the feeding site to mark when food was used or discarded. and also make sure to submit your commissary letter. For plumbing requirements, the chief building official is in the parish and city regulate the plumbing. Specifically, we're talking about restroom fixture counts and the grease trap sizing. Make sure to contact the chief building official early so that there's no delay for the approval of the site. So after plans have been approved, you will receive an approval letter from the LDH, the local LDH office. After you receive the approval letter, then you have to call back whenever you're ready to open or have your pre-opening inspection. You may not want to do that on the day that you are actually serving meals. You're going to want to do that beforehand. The inspector will schedule the inspection with you. So again, call in advance. And a person with the legal authority to sign for the sponsor must sign the temporary permit to operate before or at the time of inspection. The person in charge of the summer feeding site must be on site at the time of inspection. There's maybe two different people. They may be the same person, but typically it's it may be two different people. As far as the inspection, you want to make sure that the site is ready for service. Make sure that all your equipment is holding at the right temperatures. Refrigeration should be 41 or below. You need to have hot water, sanitizer test strips, separate paper towels must be provided. The permits will not be backdated to include dates of service previous to the issuance of the permit. In some cases, based on the length of the service, a second routine inspection is required if longer than 31 days of operation. The issuing of a temporary permit occurs when all requirements are satisfied and the site passes inspection. The site must not operate until a temporary permit has been issued. Permits are not transferable, and the end date on the permit indicates the end of the food service. If extensions are needed, the sponsor should contact the local LDH office to request an extension. Post the temporary permit from LDH and the inspection reports at the feeding site during hours of operation. Also, again, remember the summer feeding site must have a temporary permit to operate. Also, make sure to submit the summer feeding application and retail food plans review packet questionnaire if needed at least 2 weeks before you plan to operate. Don't wait until the last minute. Again, May 15th is the deadline to apply. Also, more helpful information can be found at our website, eatsafe.la.gov. All of those documents that I had referenced earlier, the summer feeding site questionnaire, retail food plans review packet questionnaire, the mobile food questionnaire, and as well as how to open a food establishment. It gives you all the steps of obtaining a permit. You may also contact the LDH office for the summer feeding site questionnaire. And not every LDH office has a clerical staff, so please remember to contact the office before stopping by to make sure that someone is there to help you. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me or Carol. Carol's my supervisor. She's the assistant administrator of field operations. Our email addresses are our name, first and last name at la.gov. It's first.last name at la.gov. And these are our phone numbers. I'm going to have this information again after the after this food safety portion of the presentation. I'm going to move on. So for food safety, I want to speak about COVID-19 information quickly. You can check out the latest COVID-19 phase restrictions at the opensafely.la.gov website here. Currently, we're in phase 3. When you go to that website, you will look for restaurants, cafes, and coffee shops. There's a bunch of different types of businesses. You'll look under the restaurant, cafes, and coffee shops to find that information for restrictions during this phase. The major points: no self-service. That means no buffet style food selection. You want to make sure that you are social distancing. There's a 75% building capacity allowed right now, and 6 employees and children should remain 6 feet away from each other. Also, face coverings are required for everyone. Children under 8 aren't necessarily required to have face coverings. Also, you want to make sure to monitor symptoms. Social distancing and hand hygiene must be observed. Hand washing is a priority for all children eating at the site. Portable hand sinks may be employed, but are not a replacement for permanently plumbed fixtures. Remember, you must fill the potable water and discard the wastewater and clean and sanitize the fixture. Hand sanitizer may be supplemented, but it doesn't replace washing hands that are soiled. Also, make sure that you are wearing your face masks properly. And social distancing must be enforced. As you can see some pictures, they have markers where you can space seating and tables so that someone doesn't sit there. And this is a good model for maybe some of those grab and go sites for walking up to the site and handing the food to the recipients. So now we're going to move on to the food safety portion for summer feeding. So a checklist of required items at your full service sites would be ambient air temperature thermometers for coolers, product thermometers to check your food product. A temperature log is required anytime food is transported. Approved sanitizer and to sanitize product thermometers and work surfaces. Sanitizer test strip, test kits that are used for the appropriate type of sanitizer. Warmers or other equipment that keep food hot above 135 or above if holding hot food. Coolers that keep food cold at 41 or below. Hand sink with hot water, soap and paper towels, and or hand dryers for servers and children if the children are eating at the site. And remember that the hand sinks have to be outside of the food prep space. In a full service kitchen, a 3-compartment sink must be available with detergent and sanitizer for washing dishes and equipment. And a grease trap is required for full service kitchens or sites with annual permits. So you want to make sure that you're preventing foodborne illness, and this is the reason for food safety and for this training. Hand washing is key. Make sure you wash hands often. You should wash your hands for a minimum of 20 seconds with warm soapy water. Also remember, don't cross-contaminate your food. And there are many ways that you can cross-contaminate. There's food-to-food cross-contamination where, for example, raw chicken may be stored above ready-to-eat foods such as Jell-O. Equipment to food cross-contamination would be an example, would be raw meat cutting board, or a cutting board used for cutting raw meat, used for also cutting lettuce with no washing in between, no washing, rinsing, sanitizing in between. And also don't touch ready-to-eat foods with your bare hand. You want to make sure that you're using gloves, tongs, utensils, or other means so that you're not touching them with your bare hands. Also, you want to make sure that you clean and sanitize surfaces. Again, you want to wash equipment, utensils, hot soapy water to clean first, and then you rinse that off and then sanitize your equipment. Some sanitizer that you can use, different types of sanitizer that you can use. Chlorine. Give me 1 minute. Apologize. Different types of sanitizer that you can use are chlorine or quaternary ammonia. Again, these are good reminders for when to wash your hands. So you want to make sure that you're washing hands after coughing and sneezing, after handling raw foods, after smoking, after using the restroom, after taking out the trash or touching anything dirty, before putting on gloves, and also after eating and drinking. We don't have that on our slide. I'm sorry about that. And this just gives you a description on how to wash hands. Also, for plumbing, all permitted sites must have accessible hand sinks for food handlers in the kitchen area. All permitted sites must have a hand sink accessible to the children if congregate dining takes place. Unless serving prepackaged food only, the site must have a 3-compartment sink. Sites must have a mop sink or other means of disposing of mop water. And for grease trap requirements, contact your local chief building official. Other food safety principles include making sure that you hold your food at the proper temperatures, cook your food at the proper temperatures. You you're using a thermometer is the only way that you're going to be able to check the temperatures of the food. Also, holding of the food requires that the food is 41 or below, or the food is 135 and above. So 41 or below for cold foods, 135 and or above for hot foods. This includes travel time. You want to make sure that you're keeping your food at the right temperatures during transport. If leftovers are permitted, then you want to make sure that you chill food properly. You have a total of 6 hours to cool. So within the first 2 hours, your food has to come down to 70 degrees. And then within 4 hours after that, it has to come down to 41. You can do it within a shorter time period. We actually recommend that, but you have up to 6 hours with those limitations shown here. If you are doing any reheating of food, it needs to be reheated to 165 for at least for 15 seconds throughout. These are different cooking temperatures for the food products. And basically and these are, it's minimum cooking temperatures, but also I wanted to show you guys how food should be placed in the refrigerator. The highest minimum cooking temperature should be at the bottom. Ready to eat foods should be up top. So if you have raw, you're always going to want to put raw underneath your ready to eat foods. Pork, eggs prepared for immediate consumption, fish and other meats will require 145 minimum cooking temperature. Ground meats, for example, and eggs for hot holding would be 155 for 15 seconds, and 165 will be poultry, any stuffed products, and products cooked in the microwave. These are just some examples. I'm going to skip this slide. It's just kind of reiterating that point. Also, be aware of major food allergens: peanuts, nuts, dairy, eggs, soy, fish, crustaceans, gluten or wheat. Those are the 8 major food allergens, but there are other food allergens. These are just the major ones to be aware of. Also, you want to make sure that you obtain food from an approved source. In this situation, the food source will be the cooking site where the food is prepared. Food should be served to children. Food served to children must be transported from a SFA school kitchen or prepared in an LDH permitted kitchen with LDOA approved sponsor. For congregate food transportation, all food is to be delivered at the proper temperature, holding temperature 41 or below or 135 and above. Foods held improperly are more likely to contain pathogens that have replicated to an unsafe number over time. So again, that 4 hours that we discussed earlier about times temperature control, after that 4 hours, if it's not maintained at those temperatures, it will bacteria will multiply to unsafe levels that cause foodborne illness. So food that's not delivered at the proper temperatures must be rejected. So when food is delivered, temperatures are to be recorded by site staff. Food temperatures should be taken at the prep site and again at the serving site. Both temperatures must be marked on a log and follow protocol if temperature abuse has taken place. Store food in proper holding equipment on site or serve the food immediately. Food delivery time should be short, and also you want to make sure you provide a written plan to your local LDH office stating how the food will be transported and how you plan on ensuring that the food is safe. Again, time as public health control is an option. Again, however, you have to have a written policy in place, and the logs must be kept by the sponsor kitchen and feeding site. Food must be marked with the discard time. Food in unmarked containers or packages or if time has expired, will be discarded. All food must be served or discarded within 4 hours after removed from mechanical control. In this case, for time as public health control, there should be no leftovers. The shelf-stable items may be reserved if done so properly. This is an example of a time as public health control log. just to give an example really quickly. Also, I wanted to speak about the non-congregate meal options for grab and go delivery to homes. If you're providing one-day meals, basically these are they have to be prepared by sponsor kitchens, full service kitchens. They also have to be labeled. For all of the non-congregate meal options, the food has to be labeled properly. It needs to include meal contents, the source of the food, holding temperature. Again, they have to maintain food at safe temperatures, 41 or below, 135 or higher, or even frozen solid, 0 degrees Fahrenheit until given to the recipient, and also include warming instructions if necessary. You also may use time as public health control for potentially hazardous foods. Again, you have to have all those requirements that we discussed earlier. When it comes to time as public health control, maintain the logs 3 years, discard times on the food, written plan and daily logs required. This is for the single day meals, but for multiple days of meals that are prepared in the sponsor kitchens or full service kitchens, you must have labels as well. However, the main difference here is we don't allow you to use time as public health control. Meal delivery options during COVID-19 for non-congregate settings. All foods must be protected against cross-contamination by using packing material that prevents spillage and reduces the chance of tampering. Packing of food for individual meals must preserve the food at the temperature that is required, 41 or below, frozen, or 135 and above for hot foods. If cooling foods, use food safety handling practices to cool foods to 70 in 2 hours and 41 within 4 hours. If the sponsors and meal providers, it's the sponsors and meal providers' responsibility to maintain safe food until given to the recipient. Also, for transported delivered meals, make sure the delivery vehicles are clean, reusable containers to maintain temperatures during transportation must be smooth and easily cleanable. It's important to use dry ice sheets, or refrigerated units to achieve cold holding temperatures. However, we don't allow wet ice to be used. The duration of the travel time must be considered when determining appropriate packing and temperature holding methods, as well as delivery means. Don't leave doors open unnecessarily or put food in direct sun or near the exhaust of the vehicle. Also consider weather conditions and make sure food is properly packaged and protected from contamination. It's encouraged that delivery people receive appropriate training to explain basic food safety principles or processes affecting their handling of the food. Also encourage them to clean their hands when hand sinks are available, and when not, use appropriate hand sanitizer to help control any spread of infection. Also, plans may fail, and it's important that you have a plan when they do fail. Control measures must be in place, log times and temperatures, and other quantifiable measures to ensure food is safe to the best of your ability. Corrective measures are necessary and required when the process is not compliant with food safety standards. Have a plan B in the event food cannot be distributed due to being unsafe. And health inspectors will not hesitate to discard your food if found out of the necessary parameters. Also, food safety training. Consider having all food handlers obtain a food handler card. Have those in charge, obtain a more extensive food manager certificate. Information on that can be found at our website, eatsafe.la.gov. And also, food safety knowledge can help ensure awareness of basic food safety principles on how to ensure the safety of the children, and your sponsorship maintains a good standing. So that's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, you can contact Carol or I or me. And this is our email addresses and contact numbers. Does anyone have any questions while I'm on the meeting?
Alina, this is Stephanie. An SFA asked that if they are already doing home deliveries, they've submitted a plan to LDOE. Do they also need to submit a plan to LDH?
Yes, they should submit a plan to LDH. And they have a permit to operate?
Yes, they do.
The LDH permit?
They're using the home delivery model for delivery of meals.
Yes.
For virtual students.
Okay, so yes, they should submit a plan. They should, submit the proposed delivery times, the delivery routes, what kind of meals that they're providing, single day meals or multiple day meals, and what method they're using, what method of food safety they're using. Basically, are they using temperature control? Are they keeping food hot or cold? We need to know that information. Please send that to your local LDH office. Carol, do you want to add anything about
that? I would like to add something to it. We don't know who's delivering where in the city or the state for that matter. And that's why we want to know what your route is. Because if there's a problem that arises, somebody gets sick or several people in a certain area get sick, we don't know how to trace the food back. So when the kids are in your school system, it's easy for us to recognize, hey, they ate at the cafeteria and they ate at their house and they might have eaten at Kentucky Fried Chicken, or they went to a ball game and ate at the ball game and they all got sick, which is a real case that happened. Not just the kids, but it was, the community had a problem. And that's why, it's because if an illness breaks out, we want to be able to know where the trail leads. So do y'all good with that? You understand what I'm trying to say?
All right. Well, Carol and Alina, thank you so much for joining us today and presenting this information, and for providing your contact information. I guess we'll go ahead and switch over to our next section. All right. Okay. And here we wanted to provide some of the regional Office of Public Health contacts. If you have questions about your permitting process or you're having trouble getting in touch with your local sanitarian, these are posted on LDH's website, and that's another contact that you can have for your region, and they may be able to provide you more information or specifically know about the building inspectors and some of the other things specific to your area that may go into permitting. So we wanted to provide that for you. And now Shanna is going to take over and start talking about planning and administering the SFSP.
Good afternoon. So we will provide an overview of the SFSP, just kind of ongoing operations, how things have been progressing over the last few months, as well as some recent extension releases that we've gotten from USDA regarding the waivers that have been in place. So we will start out with planning and administering, and then we'll work our way into that. So the Summer Food Service Program, of course, as we all know, was created to bridge the gap in child nutrition feeding through the National School Lunch and Breakfast Program when school is not in session. Children attending SFSP sites in low-income areas are able to receive free meals during the summer. While the program is primarily administered in the summer, it may also provide meals for vacation, breaks, and emergency closings throughout the year. As a reminder from the CNP Zoom update on March 4th, CACFP cannot operate with SFSP during the regular summer months. When school ends, so does CACFP. And of course, as you are all currently aware, due to recent USDA flexibilities and waivers made available to sponsors and states, SFSP participation has been an option for school food authorities since March of 2020 and continues to be. So now we'll talk about eligibility requirements for participants. Historically, the summer food service program provides meals to children 18 years of age and under when school is not in session. People aged 19 and older with a mental and/or physical disability may participate in the summer food service program as eligible participants as long as they are enrolled in the K-12 education system and both of these criteria are met. The diagnosis of a mental or physical disability and enrollment in an academic school that is intended for that population of students. The disability must be determined by a local educational agency, and the individual must have an individualized education plan or IEP on file. If you think that you may possibly have any subset of individuals 19 and over who could possibly qualify as eligible participants under the SFSP, please contact us to ensure that both of those criteria have been met. So now we'll talk about the different types of sponsors under the summer food service program. To qualify as a sponsor in the SFSP, the organization has to be a nonprofit school food authority, as everyone on the call basically is, a federal, state, county, municipal, or local unit of government, a nonprofit college or university, a nonprofit residential camp, or an other private nonprofit organization such as church groups or other religious affiliates. USDA has determined that confusion and waste occur when two or more sponsors compete or target services to the same children in the same geographic area. When this occurs, the state agency may approve only one sponsor to serve in a given area. The National School Lunch Act prioritizes sponsor types as follows, with the highest priority for summer food service program going to local school food authorities, followed by successful returning governmental or nonprofit sponsors. Next, the priority goes to new governmental agencies, and then finally, priority would go to new private nonprofit or PMP agencies. Sponsor eligibility requirements. Sponsors must be approved annually in order to offer meals at summer food service program sites. Sponsors must meet the following requirements. All potential and returning sponsors must be financially and administratively capable of providing reimbursable and nutritious meals at approved sites. Sponsors are required to accept financial and administrative responsibility for all sites under their operation. Sponsors must remain in good standing to participate each year. Sponsors must agree to provide meal service to low-income children in poor economic areas. And sponsors must additionally maintain a nonprofit food service. So that essentially means that the sponsor is required to use federal funds solely for the purpose of operating and or improving its summer food service program. Sponsors additionally must offer year-round services to areas where the SFSP sites are normally in operation. And it's through the online application system that new applicants and returning sponsors must demonstrate that they will exercise management control over meal service at all sites. The sponsor is also required to train site staff as well as central office staff, provide ongoing communication, and ensure that there's adequate supervision at all sites. Sponsors must visit new sites and any sites that had operational problems or weaknesses in the previous year and complete a pre-operational visit form. Lastly, the sponsor must sign a written permanent agreement with the state agency. So we also currently call that the CFP Single Consolidated Permanent Agreement. And we converted that into an agreement that covered all applicable child nutrition programs, inclusive of CACFP at risk, Head Start operations, fresh fruit and vegetable program, summer food service program, national school lunch, etc. So everyone that's on this call should already have a permanent CNP single consolidated agreement on file. And the only time that any changes would need to be made to that, or essentially an addendum would need to be made to that CNP agreement, is if there's any changes to your administration, such as a change in the superintendent and or authorized representative, or a change in their contact information, or for example, if the sponsoring organization or central office address changes. So contact the state agency if you have any questions about any recent changes, how to update that in the system, which essentially is an addendum or a revision to your permanent agreement that's taking place. Sponsors have many things to consider when planning a summer food service program. When planning, the sponsor's budget may put restrictions on the length of the program, on how many children the sponsor is able to serve each day, and on how many staff they can employ at sites. As a reminder, the sponsor will only receive reimbursement based on the number of reimbursable meals served to eligible children. SFSP funds received can only be used for direct operation and administration of the program. Unallowable costs include, but are not limited to, bad debts, fines or penalties, contributions and donations, entertainment and fundraising, direct capital expenditures, meals provided to unapproved sites, meals served in excess of the approved ADP or average daily participation for that facility, spoiled or unwholesome meals, and meals or food items that do not meet the summer food service program meal pattern requirements. Okay, so this slide is pretty much hot off the press. For those that may not have seen the memos that we just recently issued in the last day or so, USDA has extended the majority of the summer food service program waivers that have been in place for some time now, and they've extended them through the summer months. So the non-congregate feeding allowance that many of you have been offering with your virtual students and with your students that are hybrid students, that will remain in place through at least September 30th, 2021. The allowance to have parents and or guardians pick up meals on behalf of students has been extended through September 30th, 2021. The option to be able to establish closed enrolled eligibility at sites by using school data or community eligibility provision data, that flexibility has also been extended through September 30th. The monitoring flexibility that allows sponsors to waive that first week visit for sites that are not problematic sites has also been extended. Meal service timing flexibility where you're no longer adhered to a max of 2 hours for lunch and supper, a max of 1 hour meal service for breakfast and or snacks. That flexibility is still in place through September 30th. So you're not going to be held to the spacing in between meals or to the max duration. We'll keep that flexible on the website. The ability to offer versus serve with the summer food service program meal pattern, that option has also been extended through September 30th. The food service management contract duration does expire on June 30th, 2021. However, contracts that may expire by or around June 30th, 2021 can be extended through school year 21-22 or through June 30th, 2022. And then the on-site monitoring requirements for SFSP waiver. So essentially that option is still available for the monitor to complete any monitoring visits or reviews that are necessary to do so virtually without actually having to report to the sites as they normally would do in a typical program year. So most of the waivers that you're all familiar with that you've probably already opted into that were set to expire June 30th have been extended through September 30th. We're going to work with IT to hopefully be able to have those automatically extend in our online CMP system to September 30th if you have already opted into them so that you don't have to go in and re-elect. Basically what we did when we switched from program year 2020 into 2021. Okay, so we'll talk about some specifics, sponsor monitoring and responsibilities. So as you know, program monitoring is really essential for a successful summer food service program. The program monitor, we always say, is the key link between what's happening at the site and what the central office is aware of. Program monitors are responsible for the completion of all monitoring forms, and any monitoring form that is required to be completed needs to be reviewed by someone above the monitor to ensure that not only are they completed in full, but that there are appropriate dates and signatures obtained. As I stated, there are waivers currently in place for monitoring, but remember that monitoring really is a key component to program success. So take advantage of the waivers if that's the direction that you want to go in, but nothing prohibits you from still sending your monitors out unannounced just to do some check-ins in addition to what they are required to have to do. Additional sponsor responsibilities include attending state trainings and training central office staff and site staff, procuring food and supplies, preparing claims for reimbursement, which include reviewing all documentation that is in support of a claim and maintaining that on file, completing the online sponsor application and each site or facility application annually, and maintaining all program resource documentation for 3 years plus the current year. As a side note too, for all of the school food authorities that are currently participating in summer food service program, if you do intend to continue to offer summer food service program beyond the end of this academic school year, we do plan to continue to keep the claim system as it currently is, which will allow you to input your monthly total meals by site and by meal type. So we don't plan to convert back to the daily detail where you're having to put in every day's meal count by day, by meal type, by site. We do plan to keep it convenient and streamlined as it has been over the past few months. Okay, there tends to be confusion even still about site types. So we're going to kind of go over those distinctions over the next few slides. So just remember that open sites they're going to be located in low-income areas. Meals at open sites are made available to all children in the community that are eligible on a first-come, first-served basis, whereas a restricted open site is basically an open site with some cap in place. So there's a restriction on attendance that's been set by the operators for reasons such as space limitations, security, safety, or control. So for restricted open, we kind of refer to it as a cap or a max number that you're going to be feeding each day for any of those reasons that I mentioned: space limitations, security, safety, or control. Whereas open sites, you're just going to continue to feed children that may already be on site plus community children until the meals that you have prepared are exhausted. And then hopefully if you continue to see that there's a great need, you can adjust upward and prepare more meals to support the community. For open and restricted open sites, children do not have to be enrolled in a program to participate in the meal service. Both open and restricted open sites must be located in school attendance areas where 50% or more of the children residing in that area are eligible for free or reduced price school meals. On the other hand, closed enrolled sites are sites where sponsors are providing recreational, cultural, religious, or other activities to a group of enrolled children. So closed enrolled sites must establish the eligibility of their site through the individual income eligibility of the children attending the site, or if you're electing to use the waiver that is still in place, at this time, sponsors are allowed to use area eligibility to establish free meals to be served at closed enrolled sites. So a few summers ago, there was the policy rescission memos that came out, and at that time, area eligibility as an option to establish closed enrolled site eligibility, that was taken away. So then we had to resort to basically free and reduced meal applications to determine if closed enrolled sites were eligible. However, in the batch of recent waivers that USDA has provided in the past year and a half, that option to use area eligibility, which is either free and reduced percentages by school site or community eligibility provision site level data, that is an option under that waiver. So to operate a closed enrolled site just to a targeted population of enrolled students, you can use that drop-down feature in the online application as long as you've opted into the waiver, and you can select a school site in your community that will allow you to use area eligibility with closed enrolled. Also on that previous slide, I'm sorry, residential and non-residential camps offer food service as a part of an organized program for enrolled children. However, unlike open, restricted open, or closed enrolled sites, sponsors of camps cannot use area eligibility to qualify for reimbursement for the attending children. So at this time, any sponsor that wants to host a residential or non-residential camp, there's no waiver that allows them to make their site eligible through area eligibility. they actually have to process or receive current year free and reduced meal applications and then get reimbursed only for the children that qualify for free or reduced benefits. So there's pros and cons with the campsites, and I get questions about that each year. With the campsites, you are allowed to serve up to a combination of 3 meal types per day. However, I guess the con or the negative association with operating a camp is that you do have to maintain free and reduced meal income applications on every child that's enrolled at that camp, and you'll only get reimbursement on those that are deemed free or reduced status. This next slide, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because these are site types that we don't really that commonly see in Louisiana, but these are what we consider special site types. So essentially these site types that are listed on this slide are sites that qualify in different ways to provide free meals and to receive free meal reimbursement. So National Youth Sports Program, we used to have those sites some years back. I don't think that we've had those type of sites for at least 4 or 5 years in Louisiana, though they could make a comeback. Migrant and homeless sites are essentially where the site is targeting the larger majority of the children that they're targeting have been deemed migrant or homeless status by the school system in which they're normally enrolled. And the site operator has that documentation on hand. And the fact that 50% or greater of the students that are being served through those sites qualify for one of those means allows the site to be able to serve meals free of charge. And then there's upward bound sites as well that we typically see on our university campuses. And the criteria for children to participate in upward bound alone allows those sites to provide free meals to the children. So, in addition to site types such as open, restricted open, camps, closed enrolled sites, there is also the designation of urban or rural for sites. So a rural area is any area that is not part of a metropolitan statistical area as defined by the Office of Management and Budget. Sponsors are encouraged to use the FNS rural designation tool to determine whether their site or sites is considered rural. In rural areas, sites may incur higher costs to provide meals to their participants. This may be linked to the higher cost in transportation of food to the sites or the transportation of children to the sites. So just be aware that the Summer Food Service Program has 2 different levels of administrative reimbursement rates for meals being claimed. The higher reimbursement rates are for the sponsors of sites that prepare or assemble their own meals, or self-op sponsors, and also for sponsors with sites located in rural areas. The lower rate is for all other sponsor types, those that have vended meal service and or use of food service management companies. Because the sponsor assumes administrative and financial responsibility for the operation of all of its sites, ensuring a site's success has to be the sponsor's #1 priority. To make your summer food service program successful, you will need to evaluate these 5 areas when choosing your site. #1, administrative capability. #2, accessibility of the site. #3, meal friendliness of what's being offered to the children. #4, site activities that are offered at the site, which may draw in more children. And then of course, #5, volunteer base. Anytime that you're able to draw upon volunteers from the community, basically that's going to be cost savings for your organization. And then for returning sites, some important things to consider would be, was the site able to meet health standards last year? So if it's a site that normally, prepares its own meals on site, did it meet all of the criteria that was necessary to be permitted for operation? Or were there some issues and some things that you still have to address at that site before you will get re-permitted? So consideration of that before you decide to necessarily host a program at that site. Were there any safety issues at the locations that you served in the prior year? Is there a need to maybe relocate to different areas that are in safer parts of the community and more accessible to children? And then also, was the site serving the anticipated number of children that was planned? So how accessible is it to the community kids if you're operating an open site in that area? So open, restricted open, or closed enrolled sites, of course, with the use of that waiver for closed enrolled, can use area eligibility to determine site eligibility. And there are 3 ways to determine area eligibility with Summer Food Service Program. So that is either through school free and reduced data, census data, or site level community eligibility provision or CEP data. The Department of Education Summer Food Service Program facility application, as you're probably all familiar, does provide each sponsor with a drop-down selection of area eligible school sites that can be selected to establish area eligibility for summer feeding sites. Once a school site is selected to establish that eligibility for your open, restricted open, or closed enrolled site, that SFSP site will remain eligible to use for area eligibility purposes for 5 summers or for 5 program years. One thing that is important to note, during COVID operations under SFSP, some of our sponsors did initially start out as closed enrolled sites. They were planning to just serve their student population. And then they realized that there was a need to fill in some gaps in the community. So they did change their site types from closed enrolled maybe to restricted open or to open. 2 important things to note there. Anytime that you are changing a site type, obviously you're going to be targeting a different subset of children if you're changing over from closed enrolled to open. So a new media release would have to be issued, to the community to make sure that if you're changing from closed to open, that the community knows which sites are available, which ones are open to all community kids 18 and under. And then the second thing is that anytime you change site type in an application, it is going to break that association for area eligibility. So when you were a closed enrolled site, you may have actually been able to select that site from the drop-down list because it qualified with 50% or greater. But once you change it from closed enrolled to open, it's going to knock that site out, and you're just going to have to go back to the drop-down list and select, it could be even the same site, to reestablish area eligibility. So change in site type requires a change in the media release notification, and it requires that you reestablish area eligibility in your online facility application. Sometimes site eligibility is dependent on the eligibility of the children attending. So as we mentioned, both camps and some closed enrolled sites require the collection or use of income eligibility determination to establish eligibility for summer food service program meals. Once the household application is complete, the information is used to determine if the sponsor can be reimbursed for meals served to that participant. The household application must be completed according to instructions and be signed by an adult in the household in order to be valid. The application must then be reviewed and certified for income eligibility to be considered complete. For automatic eligibility, the household has to meet one of the following criteria: participation in SNAP or food stamps, or TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, for which a case number is provided, or the child is a foster child. And please remember that if one child in the household receives SNAP or TANF, then that extends to all children listed on the application as well. So in cases where closed enrolled sites are needed by a school system, however, there are no school sites in that community to basically access from the drop-down list, there's no sites that meet the area eligibility criteria, then the only other option is to establish eligibility of a closed enrolled site based off of individual income eligibility. So that's when household applications must be collected and processed, or if you have applications on file for all of the children that will be enrolled at your closed enrolled site, you can use those provided that they're not older than 12 months old. And the trick is, if you have to establish eligibility of a closed enrolled site using free and reduced meal applications, at least 50% of the enrolled population at that closed enrolled site must qualify for free or reduced benefits. If they do not, if it's less than 50% free and reduced eligible, your site does not qualify to be a closed enrolled site. So you'd want to reconsider possibly operating that site maybe as an open or restricted open site instead. Okay, how a sponsor chooses to provide meals at a site is one of the first decisions to make. So if the site does have the proper facilities, meals can be prepared on site. If a sponsor has multiple sites, they may also choose to prepare meals in a central kitchen and distribute the meals from that one centralized location to all operational sites. Sponsors also have the option to purchase meals ready to serve from a vendor or to utilize a food service management company. But do remember that when purchasing meals or food services, you need to adhere to procurement regulations, which we will be going in depth into shortly. So to make this decision, there's 4 things to consider. Number 1, which meals will you be serving? Number 2, how many meals will you be serving daily or weekly through your SFSP? Number 3, when are unitized meals required? And number 4, whether or not you will be eligible to receive USDA foods or commodities. You can find additional details about planning, distributing, storing, and serving meals in the SFSP Nutrition Guide. That guidance book, plus others that have been developed by USDA for the Summer Food Service Program, can be accessed on our CMP homepage. So to the right of the login under helpful links grouped, you would scroll to the bottom to where you get to the SFSP subheading. And then it's right there where you would see the USDA handbooks. Click on that link and there will be 4 or 5 different guidance books available for sponsors. Administrative guidance, the guidance book for monitors, a nutrition guidance book, and I'm forgetting the last one, site supervisor's book. So in terms of self-prep, depending on the availability of your kitchen and storage facilities at the sites, the sponsor needs to determine how many meals will be prepared per location. The sponsor does not have to choose just one method for all sites. Sites with sufficient kitchen facilities may serve as a central kitchen for other sites. In that case, the sponsor would be using 2 different methods. The central kitchen location that's cooking for itself would be considered on-site food prep. And then all of the other sites that are receiving meals from that central kitchen would still be self-prep, but they would essentially be satellite meal locations that are receiving meals from the SFA central kitchen. Of course, the advantage to using self-prep is that you will receive a higher administrative reimbursement rate per meal to help cover the additional cost of preparing your own meals. Another advantage is that you have maximum control over the quality and content of the meals. Keep in mind that all kitchens must meet all local and state health and safety regulations as overseen by the Louisiana Department of Health. This slide is going to provide you with the breakout of the reimbursement rates. So for every breakfast and or lunch, supper and or snack that meets the meal pattern that is served and claimed, every sponsor is going to get that operating cost rate reimbursed per meal. And then whether or not you're going to get the high administrative cost versus the low administrative cost, that's dependent on how your site is operating. So for other site types, it's a few pennies less that you would get reimbursed. That's typically with vended meal service and use of a food service management company. For the ones that are self-prep / rural, they, for instance, if we're looking at breakfast, they would get the $2.24 operating plus an additional 22 or so cents tacked on per reimbursable breakfast. Another thing that's important to note too is that the SFSP reimbursement rates, those are approved in accordance with the calendar year. So these rates that are displayed on this slide are in effect from January 1, 2021 through December 31st, 2021. So those rates do not follow the academic school year like national school lunch, school breakfast, and after school snack rates do. Those are approved from July 1 through June 30th. However, Summer Food Service Program operates on a January 1 through December 31 program year. So whether you are using the self-prep model or the vended model, the sponsor can elect to have meals delivered to their sites. If a SFSP site does not have the proper equipment to hold meal temperatures, then per Summer Food Service Program federal regulations, meals cannot be delivered more than 1 hour prior to the beginning of meal service. It is required that the sponsor documents the meal delivery process and the meals that are delivered on a satellite account form, as provided in the example on this slide. This form should be completed fully and be maintained at the central office as one of many source documents. So to access the satellite account form, there's 2 different ways that you can get to it on our CMP website, and neither of these versions require login access. So from the homepage, you can click on Memos Resources below the login, then click on the last bullet, Summer Food Service Program, then click on Forms, and then go under the Forms subheading to locate that satellite account form. Or you can go into the memos portion of the website, which again, from the homepage, you click on memos resources, then you click on summer food service program, and then you can just search for program year 2020. And you're gonna wanna locate memo 20-47, which is the SFSP forms book, which should contain all of our prototype forms that may be used in the SFSP. The next slide is just kind of a reference for self-prep sites. This is from the administrative guidance book that USDA developed. This is not anything that we hold sponsors to or require them to fulfill at sites. It's just kind of a guidance or a reference that can be used when determining staffing needs. So I'm not going to go too much into depth with that. Do note that vended meals and meals provided by a food service management company have to be unitized meals, which means that they need to be contained as one unit. However, the vendor may separate hot and cold foods into two parts to maintain food safety. Milk and juice may be packaged separately, but still must be served with the meal. Meals are packaged, delivered, and served as a unit. Only complete meals are eligible for reimbursement in these cases, unless there's extenuating circumstances, such as a diet order that's on file for a child that stipulates that that child must receive some other component in place of a given component. So for instance, if a child has an allergy and it's documented by their medical doctor that they need to receive 100% fruit juice in place of cow's milk, then that would be obviously extenuating circumstances, and that meal with that documentation would be deemed reimbursable. Okay, so we're switching over to commodities, USDA foods. School food authorities use entitlements to order commodities through the USDA during the school year. USDA foods, which are overseen in Louisiana by the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry, are also made available to returning summer sponsors. For a summer food service program sponsor to be eligible to receive USDA foods, they must meet one of the following three criteria. So the sponsor itself must be self-prep, or the sponsor could have entered into an agreement with a school or local school food authority for furnishing of their meals, or some SFAs that are utilizing food service management companies may also be eligible to receive commodities. So in the regulation, it's actually stated verbatim as listed for number 3. It's kind of lengthy, but sponsors that are school food authorities that have competitively procured program meals from the same food service management company from which they are competitively procuring meals for the National School Lunch Program during the last period in which school was in session may also be eligible for commodities. And that exact part of the federal regulations that deals with commodities eligibility for SFSP sponsoring organizations can be found under 7 CFR Part 225.9. And we do have a link on this slide to the 7 CFR Part 225 summer feeding federal regulations. Okay, meal options for open and closed enrolled sites. So this slide is going to go over the options for open, inclusive of restricted open, and closed enrolled sites. So either of those site types, open, restricted open, or closed enrolled, can serve up to 2 meal types per day, including snacks. The sponsor may choose any combination of breakfast, lunch, supper, or snack, except that lunch and supper cannot be selected and served at the same site. So for instance, sponsors can offer different combinations if there is a need to do so. So at some sites, if the sponsor finds that lunch and a PM snack combination is just better received, more children are coming for that combination, they can designate that in those facility applications as these sites are serving lunch and PM snack, whereas other sites might be located closer to neighborhoods where kids are coming out for breakfast. So those sites may be designated as breakfast plus lunch combination sites. So that's totally acceptable. You can customize it site by site. You just cannot couple lunch plus supper on any given day for any open, restricted open, or closed enrolled site. So with state agency approval, camps and migrant sites can serve up to 3 meals per day. And this includes the option of serving all 3 main meals, breakfast, lunch, and supper, or 2 meals plus a snack. So for instance, breakfast, lunch plus PM snack. Okay, this slide has a lot of information on it. So when we had the policy rescissions that happened a few summers ago, everything defaulted back to the old restrictions and timing for meal services for summer food service program, which indicated that there was a maximum amount of time that you could serve breakfast, there was a maximum amount of time that you could serve lunch, snack, supper, a certain amount of time needed to elapse between the start of one meal type and the next. Well, right now with all these COVID waivers that are in place, as well as with the extensions that were just granted, any sponsor that is operating under this waiver can basically ignore all of those limitations at this time. So as long as you've opted into the meal timing waiver, you can set the duration of your feeding for longer periods of time. So for instance, we did see a lot of sites that were doing grab and go. They were issuing both breakfast and lunch simultaneously from 9 a.m. till noon on select days of the week. So that would normally violate these timing restrictions, but with this waiver, sponsors really can customize their serving times to what works best for the community. We just wanted to put a reminder in here about field trips. So in the summer months, if there are any sites that are planning any kind of off-site trips to, the aquarium, to a rec location, etc., the same process would be followed as has been followed in previous years. If you are planning to package up the reimbursable meal, take it with you when you bus kids to an alternate location for a field trip, please make sure that you notify the state agency in advance of the field trip, which sites are going to be impacted by it, how many anticipated children, and which meal is actually going to be brought off-site to be consumed for that field trip. Regarding second meals in the SFSP, there is still the allowance that complete seconds can be served to children, provided that the opportunity for every child to receive a first meal has been offered to the kids. And then if there is still complete meals left over and it's really not logical to, or you don't have the holding facilities to keep that food, you can serve out complete meals as seconds. Whether or not you'll be able to claim all of those second meals for reimbursement is dependent on a formula that USDA has established. So basically, the total number of the first meals that were served and deemed reimbursable, up to 2% of that total figure can be claimed in the form of seconds. So if you served, 100 first meals, and then you ended up serving out 4 second meals to children, 2% of 100 is 2, so you'd only be able to claim for reimbursement 2 out of 4 of those second meals. So we just wanted to mention that there is a formula established by USDA. Some second meals, if they're complete, may be able to be claimed for reimbursement. Our claim system does take into account the formula. It's not going to allow any sponsor to claim more than what they're eligible to claim in the form of seconds. And USDA still says never overproduce for the purpose of providing second meals. This is just if it happens that you have seconds and you don't have any other option for recycling them or serving them out the next day, you can provide second meals to children if they so wish. So again, under normal operational times, summer feeding does dictate that meals are required to be consumed on site and cannot be taken off site for consumption. However, this is one of the many waivers that are still in play. So any sponsor that has opted into the non-congregate feeding waiver, of course, at this time, can issue meals to be consumed at alternate locations. Meal counting and claiming in the summer food service program. We really can't stress enough how important the point of service is. It's one of the most important aspects of the operation. And we did want to remind you that meal counts must be taken for each meal service at each operational site at the time of the meal service. Meal counting systems at each site must capture all reimbursable first meals, as well as any second meals issued if that's applicable, separately from any and all adult meals that may be issued. And remember that there is a distinction in adult meals between program versus non-program adults. So your program adults are those adults that are working in the cafeteria directly with food service who are eligible to receive a meal, 1 meal per type free of charge per day. Whereas non-program adults are basically any visitor or any non-food service worker that may be at the site that would typically be charged for their meal. Those must be accounted for separately. And there are multiple point of service methods that are accepted in the summer food service program, such as daily meal count form, electronic points of service, or use of a clicker. But please be reminded that if you are using a clicker at the point of service, that final count must be transferred to a record that accounts for all complete first meals, as well as any second meals served to children accounted for separately. And then any adult meals that are served, that needs to be accounted for separately as well. Sponsors must keep full and accurate records so they substantiate the number of program meals that they have submitted on each claim for reimbursement, and that summer food service program funds are only used for allowable SFSP costs. Records must also be kept to confirm the sponsor is in good standing with program requirements. So this slide is going to give you some examples of sponsor records that we would expect to see when we come out to do a TA visit or to conduct an audit. So remember your daily meal count documentation for each site that's serving meals, any applicable required monitoring forms. Always want to make sure that you're maintaining documentation of any and all training that you've provided to your staff, payroll documentation such as timesheets, any lease or rental agreements as applicable, satellite account forms if you're transporting meals, racial ethnic data forms. I'll check with USDA to see if we still have that flexibility, because when I checked with them last year, they basically indicated that for our school food authorities, since that information was already maintained at the central office, there was no need to additionally complete those. So we'll check on that. But as of right now, I don't think that those would be required to separately be completed. Any mileage logs if you're reimbursing your monitors or your area managers for their travel, itemized bank statements and deposit slips, food and non-food items, invoices and receipts, any media release that you utilized, menus, inventory records, and production records if you are maintaining those. It's highly encouraged that you maintain production records. It is not required in the summer food service program. However, I think the overwhelming majority of school systems do continue to maintain production records because that's what you're accustomed, to doing during the academic school year. And any procurement documentation, any and all procurement documentation. In regards to the CNP website and the summer food service program application, we have the link to our homepage on this slide. And just remember that when you do log into the website, if you are the authorized rep or the superintendent or another school system user that's been granted summer food service program online access, you're going to see under that purple summer feeding tab, the sponsor level as well as any facility level applications, the monthly claim feature where you're going to file your claim to request reimbursement for the meals that were served. There's a media release feature. So once a sponsor submits or receives approval for their online application, they can click on that media release letter and it's going to pull in all the details of each site, dates of operation that it's going to be in service, meal types, meal serving times, etc. And then there's also the health inspection letter template. So once you submit an application, you will be able to access that form letter that you could then send to Louisiana Department of Health to let them know about the operations that you're planning. Okay, so SFSP program requirements, I think everybody's familiar with those now. We started those about a year or two ago, and that is now part of the annual online application for all of our child nutrition programs. So when we opened up the 2021 summer food service program application in November or December, everybody that went in to complete their application for January 1 through the end of the academic school year, the first thing they had to do when they went in under the purple tab was to complete program requirements. So you're always going to have to certify these 4 areas, and you're always going to have to do it when you first access one of your child nutrition program applications for the new year. So again, note that since summer food service program does operate from January 1 through December 31, that's the program year timeframe. If you are a sponsor that currently is approved to operate, let's say through May, through the end of the academic school year, if you choose to continue operations into the summer months, you would be essentially just revising your currently approved 2021 application. So to extend the dates and to adjust your staffing days. So in this case, you would not be required to go back under program requirements and recertify, because any summer dates of operation that you're adding it under an application that's already been approved initially that is occurring under the same operating year, program year 2021. So generally, the only individuals that do have access to complete the program requirements would be the superintendent and the authorized representative. If there's any other staff members that have login access on behalf of your organization that have the ability to complete these 4 phases, make sure that they are school food authority employees. So anyone that's not an employee of the school system should not be completing these on behalf of the school system. And generally, we do prefer when it is the authorized representative that completes requirements. Okay, as you're all familiar, each of you have had to complete a sponsor level application for program year 2021. And there are parts of it that you cannot edit, such as the address information. And then there's other parts that are editable, such as the sponsor contact or main point of contact for the SFSP. Another area that you cannot edit directly is the operating dates portion on page 1 of the sponsor app. That's basically just tallying up based on all of the calendars that you build in your facility applications, and the system is going to recognize whatever that earliest start date was and whatever your latest end date is, and it's going to put that range in there. It's going to pre-populate it for you. And I think y'all are all familiar too that a facility level application is required for every physical location where meals are being served in a congregate setting, as well as where meals are being issued right now under the waivers in a non-congregate scenario as well. So any location that's serving meals under the SFSP needs to have a facility application submitted and approved through the website. And also one other thing to mention too, I know a lot of school districts are still trying to decide if they want to continue SFSP beyond the end of their academic school year. Just be reminded that you certainly can continue to serve SFSP in the summer months. It does not have to be at all of your school sites that you're currently operational under right now. You can, downsize the program or consolidate it to select sites. So in those cases, if you would be extending your program through August, but maybe only doing so at 10 out of 30 locations, you would only need to go in and revise your sponsor level application plus the 10 targeted facilities where you're going to be offering meals over the summer months to add in those additional dates of operation to those calendars and to extend staffing days or reassign staff based on how your staffing needs are going to be for the summer months. That's a lot of information. Do we have a lot of questions?
So far, we just have one question. Could you explain a little bit about lease or rental agreements?
Yes. So typically, we see that more so with our non-school food authority summer sponsors, where they're basically hosting the SFSP at a central location that has multifunction. So maybe they're using like a church that has a nice large kitchen. And so a portion of the week they're cooking from that facility to distribute the meals to their sites. But obviously the church has other activities that are occurring there. So we are looking for some type of written agreement in terms of what the cost is and the use of space. Obviously, we would not expect that summer food service program would be paying 100% of the lease on that facility when it has multi-functions. We want to make sure that that was prorated. So really all we're saying there is that
does that mean we're getting old, Ms. Pat?
Could everybody please make sure that they're muted?
You're right.
Thank you.
So if there is any type of lease or rental agreement for space that's being utilized in the SFSP, we certainly want to make sure that there is some type of written agreement between parties that stipulates how much is being assessed. We want to make sure that the range of dates for that lease agreement is not going to extend outside of SFSP operations. So for instance, in a typical summer when a sponsor is operating from May until the first week of August, if we're looking at a lease agreement for a central kitchen, we would not want to see that that summer sponsor is paying paying the lease for that facility from May through October, because summer feeding has ended in the first week of August. So we just want to make sure that there's written documentation with signatures from both parties and that everything appears reasonable as far as cost and prorating.
Right, thanks, Shanna. All right, so the next section we're going to go into is about food components. Before we really take a look at the meal pattern requirements for each type of meal, let's take a look at the food components used to make up the meal pattern. So as you all know, there's 4 meal components in the SFSP. Milk, bread, grains, vegetables, and fruit are 1 component in the SFSP, and then meat or meat alternates. Each meal requires a specific amount of the components to make up the meal pattern. So milk is our first component. It's required in an 8-ounce portion size, and it must be pasteurized, fluid, and enriched. Any fat content can be provided, and it can be flavored or unflavored. In the SFSP, freezing extra milk or excess milk to use at a later meal service is not allowed when used in the SFSP. And unlike the NSLP or SBP meal pattern, milk varieties aren't required. If jugs of milk are being utilized, then a cup size of 9 or 10 ounces must be used to accommodate the 8 fluid ounces of milk, or else it spills. So non-credible milk items include half and half, cream, ice cream, puddings or custards, non-fat dry milk, cheese, yogurt, evaporated milk, imitation milk, cream soups, sour cream, commercial milkshakes, powdered cocoa mixes. And as a reminder, milk is a required component for breakfast, lunch, and supper, but it is optional for snack. Next, we have bread grain. Under the SFSP meal pattern, each bread grain serving must contain a minimum of 14.75 grams of enriched or whole grain meal or flour, bran, and or germ. Minimum quantities to be offered for bread grains vary depending on the specific type of bread grain being offered. This is why it's important to refer to the bread grain chart. Non-creditable grains include tapioca pudding, potatoes, or potato chips. Also to mention, coffee cakes, sweet rolls, and donuts made with whole grain or enriched flour can be used as a bread component for breakfast or snack only. Here we have our bread grain chart. Even though it's a little bit hard to see, the bread grains are divided into 9 different groups. And you can note that the minimum serving size column, which is the last column to the right, is the grain chart that should be used for the SFSP. Ounce equivalents, as you know, are used in school food service programs. And here is the second part of the bread grain chart with groups E through I. The next meal pattern component is vegetables and fruit. A combination of 2 or more different vegetables or fruits must be served for lunch and supper, and the total serving size must be at least 3/4 of a cup. Also, during lunch and supper, no more than 1/2 of the total requirements may be met with full strength 100% juice. 1/8 of a cup of fruit or vegetable is the smallest creditable amount. Fruits and vegetables can be fresh, cooked, canned, frozen, or dried, or in 100% full strength juice form. Beans and peas can be counted as a meat alternate or as a vegetable, but they cannot count as both in one meal. Non-creditable fruit and vegetable items include fruit flavored gelatin, fruit sherbet, artificial fruit beverages, fruit bread, pickle relish, potato chips, ketchup, and fruit jams or jellies. As a reminder, 2 forms of the same fruit or vegetable cannot be served in the same meal, such as serving a fresh orange and orange juice. Next, we have our meat alternate component, and it must be provided for lunch and supper meals, but it's optional at breakfast. 2 ounces of edible meat alternate must be provided and may not include the weight of bones. Allowable meat alternate products include beef, fish, poultry, eggs, dry beans and peas, nuts and seeds, and commercially produced yogurt in the correct quantities. Sponsors must have the manufacturer documentation, which includes a CN label or product formulation statement when using commercially prepared combination foods such as pizza or chicken nuggets. Non-creditable items include bacon, liverwurst, imitation seafood, ham hocks, neck bones, beef jerky, imitation cheese, cheese products, cream cheese, frozen or homemade yogurt, tofu, and coconut. So now we'll discuss the meal patterns. The purpose of the meal pattern is to ensure that well-balanced and nutritious meals are being served to the children. So the meal pattern is like a collection of components that are specific to each meal type. Each meal type also requires a specific quantity of components for each meal type. All SFSP sponsors are required to meet the minimum meal pattern requirements to be considered a reimbursable meal. SFA sponsors have the option to utilize either the SFSP meal pattern or the NSLP SPP meal pattern. For breakfast to be reimbursable, it has to contain the following: 1 cup of milk, 1/2 cup of vegetable or fruit or full strength juice, and 1 serving of bread grain. For lunch and supper, all 4 components must be offered within a total of 5 food items. For lunch and supper, at least 1 cup of milk, 3/4 cup of vegetable or fruit in 2 different choices, 1 serving of bread grain, and 2 ounces of meat alternate is required. For snacks to be considered reimbursable, they must provide at least 2 of the 4 components in these amounts: 3/4 cup of vegetable or fruit, or 6 ounces of 100% juice, 1 serving of grain bread, 1 ounce of meat alternate, or 1 cup milk. Also, 2 beverages cannot be served as a reimbursable snack. For instance, serving 100% juice and milk. Sponsors may use an alternate meal pattern to accommodate children younger than 6 years of age when they're able to ensure that the right quantity is served to the right age group. Sponsors can use the Child and Adult Care Food Program meal portion sizes for that age group. As a reminder, when utilizing the SFSP meal pattern, the minimum requirements can be exceeded because there are no maximum limits. Adult meals in SFSP. At the sponsor's discretion, meals may be served to persons other than eligible children, such as program adults and non-program adults. However, adults may only be served after all participating children have been offered a reimbursable meal. The definition of a program adult is a staff member that's directly involved with the preparation or serving of a meal. A program adult may receive a meal free of charge. A non-program adult is any adult that's not directly related to meal preparation or serving. Non-program adults must pay for meals. The determined cost of the adult meal has to be the cost to produce the meal or higher, and it may not be less than the cost to produce the meal. Adult meals are never reimbursable, so these meals should be recorded separately from the reimbursable meals provided to children. And lastly, any money collected for the sale of SFSP meals must be deposited into the SFSP nonprofit account. Sponsors should clearly convey to their site staff whether non-program adult meals will be sold at their site, and if sold, what is the process for collecting and depositing those funds. Offer versus serve, or OVS, allows participants to decline some of the food offered as a reimbursable meal. OVS is not mandated, but it is an option. It can help reduce food waste and contain costs at sites. If implementing OVS at breakfast, 4 food items must be offered. The 4th food item can be from any of the meal components, and a child can only decline 1 food item. If implementing OVS at lunch or supper, a child can decline up to 2 food items, which can be from any of the items. Site staff should be adequately trained in OVS because this is a common finding when conducting SFSP reviews. As another reminder, program integrity must be maintained, and all participating children must be offered all required meal components as indicated in the SFSP meal pattern. So here we have some resources for you. We've got federal regulations, toolkits, handbooks, documents. So this is for your reference. And we're just going to keep moving right into procurement. And I'm going to turn it over to Helen Folks, who'll be doing this portion of the training. If you have questions during this portion, you please put your comments in the chat feature. Babette is on and she is going to help us answer some of those questions while Helen is conducting the training.
Okay, this next topic for discussion is procurement for the summer food service program. As part of the SFSP online application each year, sponsors complete an estimated budget for SFSP expenditures. This budget is a plan based on forecasted participation or the number of meals you expect to serve. Because program funding is provided as reimbursement based on the number of meals served by type, estimating the number of meals you will serve over the course of the program gives you an estimate of federal funding that you may have available to spend on those programmatic needs. Remember that participation early in the program schedule and sometimes late in the schedule is often lower during midsummer. So there will be some fluctuations in terms of meal service. It typically is not consistent throughout the entire summer. The reimbursement you receive may be used for purchasing food, supplies, labor, and other allowable costs like cleaning and sanitizing solutions. An excellent reference for a realistic budget is your prior year's SFSP financial statements, expenditures, and reimbursements from claims. Once you have an estimated budget and a planned menu, procurement methods will then be determined. The procurement methods will define the way you will need to purchase and document purchases for food, supplies, expenditures, and expenditures for other SFSP operational needs. Procurement planning must take place well in advance of serving that first programmatic meal in order for federal regulations and documentation guidelines to be followed legally and appropriately. Sponsors for the summer food service program must use proper procedures for purchasing and may not simply grocery shop or pick a favorite food distributor. It is also important to note that SFSP funding must be used in accordance with federal guidelines. Therefore, purchasing and procurement procedures must be well understood and documented, and procedures must be followed according to local, state, and federal procurement guidelines to ensure that every dollar spent is done so legally and for the maximum benefit of summer food service program operations. Simply stated, the funding must be spent to provide reimbursable meals to eligible children. The basis of procurement in the summer food service program is that distributors must compete for the sponsor's SFSP business. Obviously, sponsors want to get the lowest price possible for quality goods and services. The full and open standard of competition was established because of the strong belief that the procurement process should be open to all qualified contractors who want to do business with federal programs and the federal government. Fairness and integrity encourages vendors to compete. Vendors do not want to compete when the process isn't fair and doesn't promote integrity. When the competition is fair and transparent, vendors spend their time providing goods and services rather than attending bid openings. The more players there are in the market, the more competition exists. This drives costs lower and provides higher quality. If vendors know others are competing for your business, they are going to provide you the best price possible. The procurement process is a multi-step process. Next slide. It's a multi-step process for obtaining the best goods and services at the best possible price. These steps are part of administration of the contract. Effective contract administration ensures that SFA procurement procedures are well thought out, reflect needs, are completely and and are completed properly in compliance with regulations, and in the end are managed properly at the contract award level. The steps in this multi-step process include procurement planning, forecasting needs, choosing the appropriate procurement method, developing a solicitation, advertising the procurement, evaluating proposals or offers, awarding a contract, making purchases, and managing the resulting contract. Maintaining documentation of the entire process is required. You can see that the procurement process is not just the solicitation and awarding of a contract. Awarding the contract is just the beginning of the process. Once a contract is awarded, the real work then begins. This is known as contract management. As an example, as part of contract management, sponsors must ensure that the prices they are charged and the prices they pay for the items that they receive are consistent with the bid or quoted prices awarded. Overcharging is a common problem that goes overlooked if a sponsor is not maintaining invoices and enforcing contract prices. This can result in overspending, and this overspending is an unallowable cost for the summer food service program. Each sponsor must have documented procurement procedures to ensure that free and open competition occurs, that the procurement process is open and transparent, and that the sponsor has the ability to compare procurements. The sponsor must maintain the procurement plan and records of all procurement documents on site for the state agency and or for USDA to review. The Code of Conduct form can be found on the Child Nutrition Program website and is a requirement for participation in the Summer Food Service Program. Each sponsor must have documented procurement procedures in order to ensure that free and open competition occurs, that the procurement process is open and transparent, and that the sponsor has the ability to compare procurements. The sponsor must maintain the procurement plan and all procurement documents on site for the state agency and or USDA to review. The process used to procure goods and services also must match the procurement plan. So basically, you actually must do what you plan to do according to the contract. For a cost to be allowable, the purchase must be necessary to operate the program. The purchase must contribute to providing a reimbursable meal to an eligible child. The cost must be reasonable, and the cost must be assigned to the activity that benefits from the cost. In other words, purchases that were made for the Summer Food Service Program cannot be used in the CACFP program. The cost must be treated consistently across programs. If the purchase of a freezer benefits both the CACFP program and the SFSP program, the cost must be shared by both programs. If a cost benefits more than just the Child Nutrition Program, the Child Nutrition Program must only bear a percentage of the cost. For example, a central air conditioning system is purchased for the building that houses the kitchen and cafeteria and also has numerous classrooms. The child nutrition programs must only pay a percentage of that cost. It's important to ask the following questions before making the decision to procure products and services. First, how does the cost contribute to an objective? Second, is the cost recognized as ordinary and necessary? Third, can the program be carried out without the cost? Fourth, would a taxpayer find the cost reasonable? And fifth, can the sponsor defend this purchase to the state agency, the media, and auditors? Some allowable costs are compensation of employees and fringe benefits, the cost of material and supplies, memberships, subscriptions, professional activity costs, and conferences where the primary purpose is disseminating technical information and is necessary and reasonable for successful performance of the summer program. Remember that USDA and or the state agency will determine what costs are allowable and will determine if the purchase is necessary and reasonable. If in doubt, you should contact the state agency. And just remember when you're looking at allowable costs that primarily you'll be looking at food purchases and paying for your labor costs. There are numerous unallowable costs such as promotion, lobbying, public relations, bad debts, depreciation, contributions and donations, purchase of equipment and vehicles, the purchase of non-creditable food items, excessive administrative salaries, labor expenses for staff that have not been approved by the state agency through the online application system, payments for audits that are not required by the state agency, non-prorated expenses, rent for sites, late fees, insufficient fund fees, payment on loans, and meals for day travel. If the purchase is going to exceed the life of the program, for instance, a vehicle, then the cost is unallowable. This slide demonstrates how the value of the procurement corresponds to the procurement thresholds. The small purchase threshold is $30,000. When the value of the purchase is estimated at less than or equal to $30,000, informal methods, either micro purchase or the small purchase method, may be followed. However, when the value of the purchase is estimated at greater than $30,000, formal procedures including sealed bids or IFBs and competitive proposals, also called RFPs, apply. The micro purchase method does not require competition, however. Purchases must be equitably distributed and the aggregate cost must not exceed $10,000. Also, prices must be reasonable and the purchases must be necessary. So when we talk about micro purchases, it's important that these are items that are just occasionally needed. It might be a special diet item, something that is not typically purchased. A rotating list of suppliers or stores in the area can help you work down a list and vary the stores that you use so that you can show equitable distribution of purchases. As you use each vendor, you go down the list and use the next vendor for that next need. What would be a red flag is if we saw, let's say, a Kroger, a Walmart, or just one particular store that was used every single time for the purchase of this item. That would show that you did not distribute those purchases equitably. Small purchases between $10,000 but less than $30,000 require competition. This means quotes must be obtained for the products specified from at least 3 vendors. The vendor with the lowest cost that meets all criteria would be chosen. The last procurement method is what we refer to as formal procedures. These are sealed bids or competitive proposals that require public advertising and are more rigorous. All procurement procedures require documentation of how the solicitation was conducted, how the responses were received, and how those responses were evaluated and awarded, in addition to the monitoring of contract performance. It's important that when you're evaluating your contracts, or if you're evaluating who should be awarded, that you should look at those that provide the lowest prices that demonstrate responsibility and responsiveness. Okay, in terms of cost price analysis, sponsors must complete a cost price analysis in connection with every procurement. This helps in determining whether you need to conduct a formal or informal procurement. Prior year cost records can be used. If a sponsor was under the $30,000 threshold last year, but is expanding the program, a formal procurement method may need to be used. The sponsor is responsible for ensuring that the proper method is being utilized. Any purchase that was not procured properly is an unallowable expense, and the sponsor would be responsible for paying for the product or service. SFSP funds cannot be used to pay for unallowable expenses. First, we will discuss formal procurement as we go through the formal procurement methods. This includes invitations for bid and competitive proposals. Remember that if you anticipate your expenses from a vendor will exceed $30,000 total, you must use one of the formal procurement methods. An invitation for bid, or IFB, uses price as the only factor. The contract is awarded to the vendor that meets bid requirements and is the lowest in cost. A formal bid for food and supplies are typically done using an IFB because price is the most important factor. A competitive proposal, or RFP, uses award criteria. This type of formal bid might be used for procuring pest control services or repairs where service is an important factor. If you are utilizing an RFP, a set of weighted award criteria in the form of a weighted evaluation sheet must be included. There is a sample of how to do this in the procurement plan. Award criteria are included in the sample but may be changed by the sponsor as needed. Price is not the only factor, but it must be the primary factor in awarding the contract. Price must count for more than any other factor. Again, this type of procurement is typically used when a service is involved. It is not typically used for the purchase of food and supplies where vendors are bidding on the same products and price is the most important factor. In terms of advertising the procurement, all formal procurements must be advertised twice in a regional news source, with the first advertisement being at least 15 days before the bid opening. The newspaper of a large city in your area would be the appropriate newspaper to advertise. The newspaper in a small town should not be used because it's not going to reach a wide audience. In addition to advertising, the bid documents can be sent by mail or email to known prospective vendors. The advertisement must contain a general description of the items to be purchased, the deadline for submitting questions, the date that written responses will be provided, the date of the pre-bid meeting, and if attendance is required. A pre-bid meeting is not required, but if you plan to have a pre-bid meeting, it should be included in the advertisement. You must include a deadline for submitting proposals, both including the date and the time. The address where the solicitation can be obtained must be included in the advertisement, and as always, with any information provided to the public, the USDA non-discrimination statement must be included. The bid document must include detailed information about your bid. It must include the contract period, the date, time, and location of your bid opening, how the vendor will be informed of the results, and the terms and conditions that each bidder must fulfill to be evaluated. The bid document must also include benefits to the sponsor if the contractor does not perform as contracted. There must also be a statement in the bid regarding the return of purchase incentives, discounts, rebates, and credits must be deposited into the summer food service program account. If the sponsor is going to allow piggybacking, it must be included in the original bid document. If the sponsor is going to allow an escalation, de-escalation of prices based on a cost index, that also must be included in the original bid document. The document must also clearly define the method of evaluation and the type of contract. Any specific bid procedures must be included in the bid document. A statement must be included that requires the sponsor and vendor to provide access to the program and documents to the state agency, USDA, and/or the Comptroller General. The document must also include a provision requiring the contractor to maintain all records for 3 years after final payment. The sponsor must provide a description of the order process that will be expected from the winning vendor. The bid document must also include the statement of non-collusion, the debarment and lobbying certificates, and lobbying activities. These are required of all vendors and should be signed and included in the bid documents when the vendor returns the bid documents to the sponsor. And lastly, the sponsor must provide detailed specifications and estimated quantities they intend to purchase. The sponsor should provide as much detail as possible to ensure prospective vendors are bidding on the exact same items. USDA requires the following provisions and civil rights laws to be included on all formal procurement procedures. Each of these provisions and civil rights laws can be found in the sample procurement plan. Geographic preference is not allowed in formal procurements except when purchasing locally grown or raised unprocessed agricultural products. Geographic preference can be used as an additional scoring criteria to provide preference points for the purchase of locally grown or raised agricultural products. Sponsors participating in the summer food service program may apply a geographic preference when procuring unprocessed, locally grown, or locally raised agricultural products. When utilizing the geographic preference to procure such products, the sponsor has the discretion to determine the local area to which the geographic preference option will be applied. Summer food service programs, except for charter schools, have a small purchase threshold of $30,000. You also need to know if you have a local small threshold that is less than $30,000. If not, you will use the state small purchase threshold for procurement. When utilizing the small purchase procurement method, commonly referred to as quotes, you must have written specifications and provide them to each vendor. These specifications should provide clear and accurate descriptions of all products and technical requirements. Price quotes must be obtained from at least 3 responsible and responsive vendors. And of course, you must document all quotes and maintain them on file. When awarding small purchase procurements, the sponsor should award to the responsive and responsible vendor that has the lowest price. Responsive means that the vendor submits a bid that conforms to all specifications and terms of the contract. Responsible means that the vendor is capable of performing successfully under the terms of the contract. All procedures used in the small purchase procurement must be documented and maintained on file. The micro purchase method is typically used for emergency type purchases. It is used to purchase supplies or services where the dollar amount of the purchase does not exceed $10,000. To the extent practicable, the SFA must distribute micro purchases equitably among qualified suppliers. For example, if you go to Walmart for an emergency purchase of food needed to serve the meal, the next time you have an emergency purchase for a food item, you need to choose another grocery store. Micro purchases may be awarded without obtaining quotes if the sponsor considers the price to be reasonable. The micro purchase method is not to be used in order to circumvent free and open competition. In other words, the micro purchase method of procurement cannot be used so that you do not have to obtain quotes or formal bids. If you are purchasing food utilizing the micro purchase method over and over again, you are using the wrong procurement method. You should be using the small procurement method or the formal method. A non-competitive procurement is used if items are available only from a single source when the award of a contract is not feasible under small purchase, sealed bid, or competitive negotiation. Prior state agency approval is required for any and all non-competitive proposals. On this last slide, there are some detailed procurement resources. And please contact the state agency with any scenarios or plans that may not have fallen underneath some of the things that we discussed. And please feel free to use the chat box, and that will follow up in order to answer some of those questions.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead and get your questions in if you have any, and I'm just going to take this quick transition to announce that there is an evaluation. There will be an evaluation at the end of this training. So if you'd like to get credit for professional standards tracking, and then we'll have record of you attending the SFSP training for 2021, this is going to be posted near the end of the meeting. You will go to the Louisiana Fit Kids website and click on today's date, the day of this meeting, March 11th. And then you're going to click on the wording that says, click here to complete the evaluation. It's very quick. It takes 2 or 3 minutes to fill it out, and then you'll receive, a confirmation with the learning needs codes and all of that. So I just wanted to take a minute to remind you of that. It looks like we have a few things in. As far as emergency procurement, there's not a lot to say on that topic. It's going to end on March 31st. And we're not going to know if it's going to be extended until probably the day before the present proclamation ends. What we've been encouraging SFAs to do is to begin the procurement process and kind of assume that the proclamation will end soon. Let's see. We have another question: if the short non-discrimination statement can be used for procurement advertisements.
We need to double check that with Babette, because the general rule is that if it's a document that's 1 page in length, front and back are just single side, you can get away with using that single sentence as long as the font size is not smaller than the text of the actual document itself.
And Babette is saying that the short non-discrimination statement can be used on your advertisements. Typically, yes, when it's a longer form or it's got anything to do with child's eligibility or benefit, you need to have the full statement. But for that advertisement, it can be the short statement. So, okay. You can keep sending questions in, but we will go ahead just to honor your time. I know it is so valuable and we appreciate you being here with us. We're going to keep going into our last section, which is civil rights. And civil rights is a really critical part of the SFSP program. All of your staff must be trained in civil rights each year. The purpose of civil rights trainings is to inform, educate, and support all of your staff that interact with child nutrition programs. This training will cover USDA civil rights requirements, staff responsibilities, and resources and information available to assist staff in carrying out their civil rights responsibilities. Discrimination is defined as different treatment. Discrimination is defined as different treatment which makes a distinction of one person or group, either intentionally, by neglect, or by actions or lack of actions based on the protected classes. Examples of discrimination include giving one group or type of participants larger or extra helpings of food, separating genders, failing to provide children with a dietary disability accommodating meals, failing to provide program information to all potential program applicants. And the protected classes in the child nutrition program, including SFSP, include race, age, color, sex, national origin, and disability. Civil rights training is required annually for all staff. This includes full-time staff, part-time staff, temporary staff, central office and site staff, as well as any volunteers. Documentation for civil rights training must be maintained for 3 years plus the current year. Documentation must include sign-in sheets, agendas, the dates and time of training, as well as a sample of the training that was used, such as the first 3 slides of the PowerPoint. For instance, if you use our training, you could pull that for us. Civil rights training subject matter must include each of the following: the collection and use of data, effective public notification systems, complaint procedures, compliance review techniques, resolution of noncompliance, requirements for accommodation of persons with disabilities, requirements for language assistance, conflict resolution, and customer service. Racial and ethnic data is used to determine how effectively a program is reaching potentially eligible children and where outreach may be needed. All SFSP sponsors must have a system to collect the racial and ethnic data of all program participants in accordance with FNS Instruction 113-1. This data is used to determine the state's compliance with federal civil rights laws. USDA regulations state that respect for individual dignity should guide the process and methods for collecting data on race and ethnicity. Therefore, self-identification or self-reporting is the preferred method of obtaining characteristic data. The collection of this information is strictly for statistical reporting requirements, and it has no effect on the determination of their eligibility to receive program benefits. This data must be maintained in a confidential file for 3 years plus the current year, and this information should be restricted to authorized school personnel and other authorized state and federal personnel when requested. And I'm not sure, it looks like our image isn't showing up, but this should be a picture of the racial and ethnic data form. All SFSP sponsors are required to complete the site racial and ethnic data form at each SFSP site at least once annually. The racial and ethnic form can be found in the SFSP form book on the CNP website. The link has been provided in the training. As a reminder, only one ethnic category is assigned per person. However, multiple racial categories can be selected if appropriate. Ethnicity is broken down into 2 categories, Hispanic or Latino and non-Hispanic or non-Latino. The racial categories include American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white. A person may identify as belonging to multiple racial categories. All FNS assistance programs must include a public notification system. The purpose of public notification is to inform applicants, participants, and eligible persons of the program availability, program rights and responsibilities, the policy of non-discrimination, and the procedure for filing a complaint. Through public outreach, sponsors are trying to ensure program access to as many potential participants as possible. Public notification must include information regarding eligibility, benefits and services, program availability such as hours and locations, applicant rights and responsibilities, procedures for filing a complaint, non-discrimination policies, and any program changes. Sponsors must notify the public annually of their participation in the program. Notification to applicants and participants must include information regarding program availability, program rights and responsibilities, the procedure for filing a complaint, and the policy of non-discrimination. The public notification system must include the following elements. First, the public release. Sponsors must take specific actions to inform the public of their program rights and responsibilities and the steps necessary for participation in the program. Number 2, you must display the "And Justice for All" poster. Schools must display the "And Justice for All" poster in the correct size, which is 11 by 17, in a prominent location where it's visible to all participants in the program. The poster provides the USDA address and phone numbers that the public can use to file a complaint if they think their civil rights have been violated. Applicants and participants must be advised of their right to file a discrimination complaint, how to file the complaint, and the complaint procedures. Non-discrimination statement. All information materials, including websites used by schools to inform the public about FNS programs, must contain the non-discrimination statement. And here, especially on websites, it should be the full statement. Public notification can include methods such as internet and computer-based applications, the newspaper, radio or television, letters, leaflets or brochures, bulletins, and be sure to convey the message of equal opportunity in photos and other graphics that are used to promote program information to applicants or participants. All sponsors must prominently display the USDA non-discrimination poster and Justice for All at all sites where participants receive meals. The USDA non-discrimination statement must be included on all forms of communication and program materials, including all materials for public information, education, or distribution that mentions USDA programs. The long version of the non-discrimination statement is required on all documents longer than 1 page or 1 sheet of paper, front and back. The long version of the non-discrimination should also be used whenever possible or where space permits. The short version of the non-discrimination statement can be used if the document is too small and there's limited space, such as on menus or nutrition flyers. If using the short version of the non-discrimination statement, a 9-point font is required. And as I said earlier, the long version of the non-discrimination statement is required if the document has anything to do with child eligibility or benefit determination. And here is the non-discrimination statement in Spanish. All right. Customer service is defined as effectively communicating with customers, responding to customers' needs, valuing the customer's worth, and instilling excellence through courtesy, confidence, and enthusiasm. Treating customers with respect and dignity through excellent customer service saves time and minimizes opportunities for complaints and angry customers. All children must be allowed equal opportunity to participate in child nutrition programs regardless of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability. All participants of the child nutrition program must be treated equitably. In order to reduce the risk of a civil rights discrimination complaint, you can ask yourself the following questions each time a participant comes to your program for services. Number 1, am I treating this person in the same manner that I treat others? Number 2, have I given this person the opportunity to ask questions? And number 3, have I provided the person with the information he or she needs to make necessary decisions? And along with customer service comes conflict resolution. In no way is a sponsor to impede a customer's right to file a civil rights complaint. However, most conflicts are easily resolved by using appropriate tools. Conflict resolution consists of useful skills to assist with the solution of complaints. These skills include using a win-win approach, such as changing the conflict from an attack and defense to cooperation to avoid the desire to blame, the use of a creative response, which turns the problems into possibilities to improve the situation, to demonstrate empathy, to help others feel that they are understood by being an active listener, by appropriate assertiveness, so state your case without arousing the defenses of the other person. Remember to use I statements to communicate your feelings directly. Manage emotions. Stick strictly to the facts of the complaint and communicate your feelings directly. Have a willingness to resolve. Identify barriers to a resolution and overcome those barriers, and avoid repeating the situation. If the complainant persists with their complaint, direct them to file their complaint with USDA's Office of Civil Rights. Limited English proficiency, or LEP, are those individuals who do not speak English as their primary language and who have a limited ability to read, speak, write, or understand English. Sponsors must take reasonable steps to assure meaningful access to the information and services they provide to individuals with LEP. All SFSP information should be provided in the necessary languages for all participants and their families. For example, enrollment forms, menus, brochures, and letters should be provided in necessary languages for all participants and their families. A sponsor is required to provide food substitutions or modifications for a child with a dietary disability. A written medical statement completed and signed by a licensed physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant is required to be on file when the request falls outside of the meal pattern. If the meal modification falls within the meal pattern, a medical statement is not required. The medical statement must include information regarding the child's impairment and how it restricts their diet, an explanation of what must be done to accommodate the disability, and number 3, the foods to be omitted and the recommended alternatives. I'll note here that it's not allowable to ask what the child's disability is. If the child or family volunteers that information, that's okay, but forms and information cannot specifically ask what the disability is. Applicants and participants must be advised of their right to file a complaint, how to file the complaint, and of a complaint procedure. Any person who believes they've been discriminated against based on protected classes, national origin, race, sex, color, age, or disability has a right to file a complaint within 180 days of the alleged discriminatory action. Complaints may be written, verbal, or observed. A complaint may also be anonymous. Anonymous complaints should be handled the same as any other complaint. If the complaint is verbal and the person alleging discrimination is not inclined to put the allegation in writing, the person to whom the complaint was made must write up the complaint on behalf of the complainant. All SFSP sponsors must have a civil rights procedure. The civil rights complaint procedures designate a point of contact, which is usually the program director for all discrimination complaints, and describes the procedures that will be followed in accordance with federal civil rights law and USDA civil rights regulations and policies. The following procedures must be adopted and followed by all sponsors. You can follow these 3 steps. Download the civil rights complaint procedure form from the CMP website, complete the form, and then keep it on file. When handling a civil rights complaint, the first step is to document the complaint and make an effort to obtain the following information: the name, address, and phone number of the complainant, the specific name and location of the entity delivering the benefit or service, the nature of the incident, action, or method of administration that led the complainant to feel discriminated against, the basis on which the complainant feels discrimination exists, so which one of the following: race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability, the names, titles, business addresses, and phone numbers of the persons who may have knowledge of the discriminatory action, and the date or dates during which the alleged discriminatory actions occurred, or if continuing. The next step is that all complaints must be forwarded to the Civil Rights Division of USDA Food and Nutrition Services within 3 days of receiving the complaint. The third step in civil rights complaints is to maintain documentation. All civil rights documentation should be kept at a central location and should be maintained for 3 years plus the current year. Here's an example of the discrimination complaint form. The link is provided here on this slide. Please note that this form is the USDA version and it is newly adopted for all SFAs and sponsors to utilize in Louisiana. The complaint form must be available at all sites participating in the SFSP. When an individual wants to report a discrimination complaint, site staff should have as little involvement as possible with the complaint process. All staff must be trained on civil rights in this civil rights complaint form. USDA Regional Office is responsible for the review of the state agencies. The state agencies are responsible for the review of the School Food Service Authorities, or the SFSP sponsors. State agencies must report any significant findings to USDA. SFAs must receive a pre-approval visit to ensure compliance with civil rights before receiving federal funds, and compliance is assessed through the administrative review. If noncompliance is indicated, a corrective action plan must be implemented to achieve voluntary compliance within 60 days. The corrective action plan should describe the agency's actions to be taken to resolve the noncompliance determined. If the corrective action is not achieved within 60 days, suspension of assistance or termination may result. All participating sponsors must inform potential beneficiaries, particularly minorities, of the availability of the SFSP. Sponsors are required to display the And Justice for All poster in a prominent place at the site in the sponsor's office. Also, sponsors need to make program information available to the public, take reasonable steps to provide information in appropriate languages other than English based on the frequently encountered non-English languages of individuals eligible to be served or likely to be affected by the program. Sponsors must ensure translations are accurate and include the non-discrimination statement and instructions for filing a complaint on all materials directed to participants and their families. Sponsors also must take appropriate steps to ensure that communication with people with these disabilities is as equally effective as communication with people without disabilities. In addition, sponsors must ensure meals are served to all attending children, regardless of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability, and make sure all children have equal access to service and facilities. All sponsors must collect beneficiary data each year by racial ethnic category for each site under the sponsor's jurisdiction. The sponsor must count the participating children at least once during the site's operation. And here's another checklist for civil rights compliance. All right, and here's another list of resources. These are specifically associated with civil rights in both NSLP and SFSP. And you may find some good resources there. And so we are officially done with the slides and the content. If anybody has questions, feel free to submit them now. Don't forget about the evaluation that can be found on the Louisiana Fit Kids website on the calendar. And also I wanted to mention, if you attended the March 4th CNP update, you can still go ahead and submit that evaluation. You can click on the March 4th date on that calendar and submit it. We had a lot of participants and we didn't have very many people fill out the evaluation. So if you would still like to get credit for that, you can go ahead and go in and fill that out. So if you have any questions, feel free to submit them now. And if not, okay, so I will send the slide deck for today's presentation. I will send it over to the Louisiana Fit Kids website and we can get that posted as soon as possible.
Stephanie will be happy to post that. I've also been recording the meeting, so we may actually have something more visual.
Oh, great.
That we would be posted on our YouTube channel.
Awesome. Will there be a link to that from the website to the YouTube channel?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, are there any other?
It's a work in progress, so it, I'm hoping that it works because it depends on the size of the file.
Right. Okay. Are there any other questions? Babette, thank you for answering questions for people. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing anything else come in. So thank you so much for attending today. Thank you for your time. And as always, feel free to reach out to state agency staff. We're happy to take questions, provide additional information. You can contact us with anything you need. All right, thank you.